I Russian sock puppet. This drama llama.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Drama Llamas. I am Doug Urbanski.
And apparently Doug is hungry today. He's not sharing his noodles. So instead I'm drowning my sorrows in something of my own. No, not really. This is actually vanilla something. Drinking this would be terrible. Maybe, would you like a little vanilla? I'm going to take that as a no. So, preface. There is no preface. Premise, whatever. They're all the same. They start with a P. They're in the book. I mean, what more do you want?
The first actual chapter of The Art of Dramatic Writing.
Hey, you got it right this time! I'm so excited for you. So, there's some interesting things in here, I say, as a sort of neutral way to open while I stall for time and find what I was going to talk about. Well, why don't we start with your thing? You said you had a little bit of an issue with one passage. Argument. Maybe we can get Egri, whatever the crap he is, to come down for some fisticuffs.
It's mainly Egri's position that regarding the premise and the idea that it's preferable to have a single premise as opposed to multiple premises.
I think he goes farther than that.
A play or a work.
Doesn't he even say, like, it's gonna suck?
He does.
Basically?
He does make it sound as though, I believe, I'm trying to remember on what page, he does give an example of plays that do have multiple premises, but the premises included are weak, as opposed to other works that have single premises, or a single premise. But those are stronger because they have that single premise. And that's something I wondered if maybe that was just due to some plays that have, if they do have multiple premises, is there a contradiction between those premises, and maybe that's why they are viewed as weaker or not as good.
I wonder, there's one that evolves, changes. If you look at this picture of a kitten, as I find it.
Episode 3 will have these pages marked.
Maybe. Maybe we'll even have tabs.
Not that far.
No? Okay, too much. But it talks about one premise evolving, changing, and actually almost flipping itself on its head, which is interesting. What did you think about the simplistic nature of these premises? Like, if you look on page 8. Heedlessness destroys friendship. Ill temper leads to isolation. Prudishness leads to frustration. I mean, it's almost formulaic. You could almost just say that a play's premise boils down to, X leads to Y. It's almost silly. Like, just throw two random things out there. Gluttony destroys the love of poodles.
Well, and a lot of these premises, they come off as almost Aesop fable morals.
Yeah, I never thought of that.
For reality leads the way. It's like these are almost like things I would read in Poor Richard's Almanac or something, which Benjamin Franklin was awesome and everything.
Indeed,
indeed. But, I don't know. We live in a far more cynical time. I think that just having a simple little moral isn't enough for a lot of readers.
And maybe it's me, maybe it's my pretentious English majorness that wants there to be something more, something deeper, right, that fights back against this idea of simplicity, but it almost seems at times a little self-gratifying when he takes Romeo and Juliet and any of these other plays and boils them all down to the same one or two premises. And, he takes the event splits them down and adds in even this mock surprise. You know, oh, wait, I know! Bitterness leads to getting kicked in the face! And he keeps bringing it back to the ones that he himself has created.
Right.
So I guess I understand his point, but I don't know. I thought that they were a little bit simplistic.
Yeah.
Not to say that it wasn't a worthwhile read.
It did. The chapter did offer a lot to think about, just in terms of premise and just the fact that a lot of these plays can be boiled down to those 5-word premises. But the question is, what does that do to the value of those plays? I mean, Romeo and Juliet, great love defies even death. I mean, that's. I think you could read that. You could read that play in other ways than something like that. I mean, I think that's a really optimistic way of reading it. The cynical reading that I would have would be something like, I don't know.
Everyone dies in the end.
Young love is foolish.
That's actually true. Young love leads to rash decisions. I mean, there's an argument in the book against that, about like the prime premise of the play, and he argues against something that highlights death in Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
But yeah, I think that saying you're very distracting. Those smell delicious.
Yeah.
No, I can't do that. But I still think that while it's worth considering, I think that his idea of premise is just a little bit on the simple side still. I mean, I think maybe you can have sub-premises, and I think he mentions that too at one point, the idea of a sub-premise. So I think for the most part I agree with him. There was one point that I really was shocked. He explicitly states, don't write something that you do not believe. And at that point in the reading, I actually verbally out loud said, what? Spoke to my book. Because A, I'm a giant nerd like that. And B, because that caught me off guard. I don't agree with that. I'm curious what you think.
He does give a caveat, though. Granted, it's I think it's a bit of a pretentious caveat, but he does say something like, because he makes reference to Moliere and those greats. I will find that page this time.
Douglas looks for that page. Oh, he found it. No?
No, yeah, but it's basically the idea that, a lot of these older authors, they are genius enough to at least make it seem like they believe. To even understand their characters enough or something like that. Aha! Page 15. Did Shakespeare, Moliere, and Ibsen believe in their own premises? Almost certainly, but if they did not, their genius was strong enough to feel what they described, to relive their heroes' lives so intensely that they convinced the audience of their sincerity. But, I mean, how does that help us lowly writers who aren't Shakespeare, Moliere, or Ibsen?
That was my problem with his caveat. It almost seemed to me to say, you there, those of you that aren't Shakespeare, unless you have the brilliant mind of good old Billy, don't even try. And maybe he's not. Maybe I'm just reading into the pretentiousness because it's a published author and I'm not published and I'm petty and, spiteful like that. But it did seem to be, are you a genius? Can you convince us that you really buy into this even though you don't? Because if not, don't mess with it. You'll make a horrible play.
It seemed like a cheap way out. A cheap explanation.
Yeah. So I can understand the desire for passion.
Right.
Because if you can't put passion into a play, it's like when you're up on stage, when you're singing, when you have a bunch of 3-year-olds that are up on a play and they're singing and they really don't want to be there because they're fidgety and they're la 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 la, and they're not having a good time and it's awkward for everyone watching because they know they're not having a good time. We know they're not having a good time. I think it's the same thing.
No, I think so.
So maybe we could say if you can't put passion into your play, don't write plays. If you can't share your noodles, don't write plays. I think that's a valid point. That was a spiteful swallow, Douglas. That was way more loud than it needed to be. I think it's time to move on.
What would you say your favorite film was?
That was a hard call. I'm a big fan of one of Christopher Nolan's early works, Memento.
Ah, Memento.
The story told backwards that is in fact ruined if watched in chronological order.
What would you say the premise of that is? Putting you on the spot, I know. But
That's okay, I can cheat later with editing and make it seem like I thought of it instantaneously. And I probably will have to. Let's see. I would have to say something about treachery destroys those who implement it. That's horribly worded. But you know, the guy who's playing the police officer tries to play Lenny for the fool and manipulate him to get this money.
right.
And it ends up biting him in the butt. He ends up, you know, it's been out for long enough, spoiler alert. He ends up getting shot in the face.
Well, it's not even a spoiler.
That's true. It's the start of the movie, because that's the end. But, yeah, I think it would have something to do with the nature of treachery. But see, then that doesn't seem to do justice to the whole Sammy Jenkins thing.
Well, exactly.
Which is a big part of the movie. So, I don't know. I mean, I suppose if it were a stage play, the focus would be on the treachery, and the treachery biting the one who was implementing it. Move, mouse. There we go.
Well, and I was even thinking of my favorite movie, Blade Runner. And, you know, a premise that I could come up with on the spot for it is something like humanity is not necessarily biological, I suppose. I'd reword that better in the future. But, again, like, it's a theme, but I don't know that it's the premise, necessarily. It's one of those things where premise and theme seem to be very tightly connected.
Yeah, it definitely overlaps.
If not confusable. If that's a word.
Confusable-ish-tenarian.
Confusing?
That's a new word.
But
So yeah, definitely an interesting thing to consider. Tied in heavily to theme, but with maybe more movement, more momentum.
yeah,
Push,
absolutely.
if you will. So, I think that covers it.
I hope so.
You're out of noodles, so I'm simply left to curl up in a corner somewhere and weep at my delicious, delicious ramen that doesn't even exist. I'm depressed, so I'm going to put up a picture of a kitten now.